So welcome to everybody who's joined us so far. We'll just let everybody else come into the room. So there's been great demand this morning for this event. Okay, I'm going to start by welcoming everybody to this Children's Rights Alliance event on the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill. What will it mean for children and young people? And I'm delighted as chair that I'm joined by such an expert panel who are going to guide us all through this. And I literally have the job of chairing this discussion. As part of the discussion, we will be encouraging everyone to put in questions through the Q&A function. And we will encourage people to actively participate online using the hashtag 123OnlineSafety. So you can join the conversation either way. This Children's Rights Alliance campaign brings together 15 Children's Rights Alliance members. I'm going to name them once to ensure that they all get a check for joining such a great campaign, but they will forgive me that it'll be a one-time only event. So I want to thank and welcome the 15 Children's Rights Alliance members who've joined together. Alcohol Action Ireland, Barrettstown, Barnardo's, Cyber Safe Kids, Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, Foróige, Irish Heart Foundation, ISPCC, National Youth Council of Ireland, 1 in 4, Psychological Society of Ireland, Rape Crisis Network Ireland, Scouting Ireland, spunout.ie, and Young Social Innovators. And it's really great to see such a brilliant collection of youth and children organisations coming together to work on this important issue. The campaign is kindly supported by the Community Foundation for Ireland via the RT Does Comic Relief Fund. And I know that for the Children's Rights Alliance, these funds are vital to ensure that it can run this campaign. I see a number of people are still joining us, so I am going to encourage that you do participate by putting in questions through the Q&A function, or you can do so online using hashtag 123OnlineSafety. If you are putting questions in through Q&A, if you come from an organisation or you're representing an organisation, it would be great if you could identify that. Okay, I think the numbers have ticked up, so I think it's now appropriate for me to hand over to Julie from the Children's Rights Alliance. She's the Legal and Policy Manager. She leads the policy work for the Children's Rights Alliance across this area of online safety. She's worked in different roles, so she brings all that together along with her qualifications as a barrister to this work that she's doing. So Julie, will you introduce the campaign to us?
I will indeed, Gillian. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We in the Children's Rights Alliance this morning are delighted to launch our new national campaign, the 123 of Online Safety, which, as Gillian mentioned, is supported by the Community Foundation of Ireland through the RT Does Comic Relief Fund. The campaign, as Gillian mentioned, is made up of 15 Alliance members, and what we are doing is coming together to push for critical changes in the area of online safety, digital rights, and youth participation. We know that children and young people's use of online platforms has increased dramatically during the pandemic. It's where they learn, where they connect, where they create, and where they chat. And we as a society and government and online services all have a responsibility to ensure that children and young people can experience all the opportunities the internet offers them, and that they can do so in a way that is safe and as positive as it can be. And that is what this campaign will be focusing on. So in the short term, we are looking at the general scheme of the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill. This bill presents a fantastic opportunity for Ireland to really take on a leadership role in online safety in Europe. And it's a chance for the government to produce legislation that will really work to make the internet a safer place for our youngest citizens who, let's face it, are far more in tune with the online world than most of us, especially us here in the panel, will ever be. While we welcome publication of the general scheme, there are some key changes we would like to see happen in order for it to be really fit for purpose. So in particular, we want an online safety commissioner to be named in the legislation and to be established. And we need this online safety commissioner to have real teeth and appropriate powers. What we want them to be able to do is to play a central role in setting a really high bar for online safety. And to do this, we know that the commissioner will need to be sufficiently resourced and that they need to have the powers to act when platforms fall short of these standards. Critical to this, the online safety commissioner needs to have the power to take on and resolve individual complaints from children and young people. And that is what we are here today to focus on. Currently, this is not in the legislation. We need to respect children and young people's rights to an effective remedy. And we can do this by giving them a place that they can go to make a complaint where a platform has not responded effectively to the harm that they might experience online. I look forward to having the opportunity later on to go through the system we are proposing. And I'm just going to leave you with a short quote from one of the young people from Ferriga, who I think says it better than what I ever could. I think it would be great to know that there is somewhere you can bring a complaint. Knowing that there is an online safety commissioner who will listen makes me feel online safety is being taken seriously. So on that, I'm going to leave it, Gillian, and I'll come back in more detail later on.
Thank you very much, Julie. That's great to have your overview to set the scene for us. I've already seen we have one question in on the Q&A. So just to answer that question, this is being recorded. People would have asked to give permission as they came in. So the recording will be available afterwards, is my understanding. And I think this must be a highly unusual panel because we have no slides. So there will be no slides to send to you afterwards because we're going to be using the intellect of our panel and hopefully they will inform us and share their insights. If you want to put in a question, please do so via the Q&A or join the conversation online at #123 online safety. So let's start. What we're going to do this morning is I'm going to ask each of our panelists, I'm going to give them an opportunity to speak, and then we're going to have a Q&A led by your questions. And it won't surprise anybody that I have some questions myself, but hopefully those participating, and it's great to see such a huge number participating already online, but those participating will have questions. And I promise you, your questions will take priority over my questions. So to start to set the scene, I'm delighted, and I think it's an honour to the Children's Rights Alliance, but also it's the respect of our Ombudsman and Information Commissioner for Ireland that Peter Tyndall is joining us here this morning. And he's going to share his experience of the role of the Ombudsman and insights into how an individual complaints mechanism can work to deliver effective remedies. And we're very fortunate to have Peter's calibre here this morning because Peter not only brings his experience as Ombudsman and Information Commissioner for Ireland, he has also served as the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales. He was Chief Executive of the Arts Council in Wales. He's worked in a variety of positions, senior level positions, and he's currently president of the International Ombudsman Institute. So I know that, Peter, you are citing from direct experience as well as you know, that you're able to bring all of that knowledge to help us understand your role and how this may be useful in us understanding what we need to be looking for in this legislation. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you here this morning. As you can imagine, as an ombudsman, I'm somebody who passionately believes in the power of complaints to improve the lives of people in my context, in the context of public services in Ireland. I should also acknowledge, in particular, the two other ombudsman offices in this general space, Peter Feeney as Press Ombudsman, and of course, Dr. Niall Muldoon, known to most of you as Children's Ombudsman. And it's very pleasing that Karen from his office is also with us here this morning. In preparing for these remarks, I was reflecting on something Gillian mentioned to us in the run-up to the conference on Euro 2020 and the changed media landscape in which we operate. It was previously a landscape that was dominated by the tabloid press. And now people with carefully curated social media are able to present a very different picture of themselves online. So we saw the players' charitable activities and their work in equality campaigning. So in that sense, it's important to recognize that social media give us a huge opportunity and provide a huge new landscape, or not so new anymore, which have greatly enriched our experience of community and of engagement. But there are also downsides, and the racist postings, which many of us have seen online following England's loss in the final, show that this is not necessarily a safe space, even for people who work very hard to control their image and who have access to very considerable professional resources to support them in their engagement online. So, anyhow. So I just want to say, as was said, something about the role of an ombudsman. First of all, the ombudsman is the final point in a complaints mechanism. It's not a substitute for an internal complaints mechanism. Normally, my office and others would expect people to exhaust internal processes. But I think just in terms of reflecting on the role of any new commissioner, there is the discretion to accept complaints directly if there are compelling reasons to do so. The other thing that's important to say is informal resolution is a very important part of what we do. So whereas some of the time my office is developing major investigations and producing major reports, most of what we do is intervene directly where it appears to us something has gone wrong on behalf of the complainant to get it fixed, and to get it fixed quickly. And that's an important part of the role. We deal with both individual and systemic complaints. Many complaints the circumstances are unique to the individual and they can be resolved in that context. Sometimes you see a group of similar complaints. Some of you will have been aware of the work of my office looking at the situation of people under 65 in nursing homes, where we received a series of complaints which led us to believe there was a systemic problem. And sometimes systemic issues can be identified from a single complaint. An example of that was where somebody complained to me in a previous post about the fact that they hadn't had a recall appointment for cancer care. And as a consequence, their situation was very much worse than it would have been had the appointment been made when the appointment was due. In that instance, it was obvious to us that the person concerned was the victim of a failed IT system. And then it became equally obvious that that was likely to apply to people not just with that particular hospital, but right across the system, because they're all using the same process. So you can see systemic issues can come both from a combination of complaints, but also even from an individual complaint. My office also has what are described as own initiative powers, so that if it's obvious to me that something is going wrong, I can choose to investigate it even in the absence of a complaint. Now, in the public sector where I operate, an ombudsman only makes recommendations. And the reason that works is because the public bodies are accountable to the Oireachtas. So people think it's weak, but in the public sector it isn't. All of the recommendations historically made by my office in over 30 years have been accepted by the bodies in jurisdiction. However, that doesn't work in the private sector and with private sector organizations. So if you look at the Financial Services and Pension Ombudsman, they don't make recommendations, they make binding decisions. Now, I noticed in some of the preparation work for the role of the commissioner that the Alliance has been undertaking, there's a suggestion that the decision should be enforceable by court. My own preference would be that the decision should be binding and can be challenged by way of judicial review. I think, as it is with the case with the Financial and Pension Services Ombudsman. And that's something you may want to think about as you move forward. One of the other things that an ombudsman often does is try and set the standards by which complaints are done. Now, I noticed that one of the potential roles for the commissioner, again, is setting complaint standards. I would have said that one of the things we're trying to introduce is a model complaints mechanism. And again, that might be something you want to think about. by insisting that everybody uses the same complaints mechanism. In other words, that the timescales are the same, something that's simple, that's quick, that doesn't have multiple stages, and most particularly that's effective, that it puts right wrongs quickly. Then by having standardization, not only can people wanting to complain know what to expect, but equally you can generate statistics both about performance, so the number of complaints a particular body is receiving, but also at the time it takes to resolve them, what actions they've taken in response. But also you can look at complaint topics. And again, that's a hugely valuable source of data about what's going wrong. So something to think about, having the power to set the model complaints mechanism for those bodies that are within jurisdiction. Another important aspect is signposting requirements. It's vital that the legislation, if there is to be a commissioner, should require the bodies concerned, the social media providers, to signpost the commissioner when they're dealing with complaints from people who are using their services. I had a little think about who complainants are. In my case, complainants are generally individuals, but you sometimes get group complaints. Farmers' representative bodies, for instance, are very effective at coming to my office. So being able to get group complaints from NGOs is important. One of the things I think that is worth thinking about is whistleblowers. Currently, my office cannot accept complaint from staff, but it's possible that staff in social media providers might well be finding it difficult to have put right things they've identified as failings, and having the capacity to accept complaints from them, I think, would be another useful string to the bow, so to speak. Say something else about anonymous complaints. It's difficult sometimes to deal with anonymous complaints, but nonetheless, if an anonymous complaint contains information which suggests that somebody is at risk, then there needs to be the capacity to do something about it. We can get around it because we have own initiative powers. But somehow or another, you think some of the people who might want to complain to a commissioner might well not want to identify themselves, and yet their complaint might be important. So just another thing to think about. I want to say something about the value of complaints. First of all, they help to identify shortcomings and obviously to provide redress for a particular individual. Secondly, learning organizations regard complaints as an important evidence piece in a process of improvement. So they actually, organizations that want to get better are interested in complaints. Doesn't matter whether you like being complained about or not, but you need to know what people think about you, and they can therefore be integrated into a wider feedback mechanism so that they can be seen alongside people complementing services. They don't have to be standalone. And just the final point, there's a question as to whether you should have individual complaints mechanisms sitting alongside regulators. So is a regulator enough? Well, I think it's important to say that across the public service in Ireland, we have regulated services, like for instance, in healthcare, like in nursing homes and so on. But you also have individual complaint mechanisms. Now, the individual complaint mechanisms quite often bring to light things that an inspection and a broader regulatory regime won't bring to light. The really important thing is to have a good feedback loop between the complaints and the regulation, whether the regulator themselves deals with complaints or whether complaints are dealt with separately. Where systemic issues are being found, they need to be fed into the regulation process so that the future regulation takes account of shortcomings that have been identified by individuals complaining. So I hope that's helpful to you, and I'm quite happy later to take any questions. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Peter. I nearly want to jump in with questions now, but I want to have respect for all of the panel because you've given us a lot of insights and a lot of food for thought. And I think there's some things we'd like to probe further. But for me, I found it really informative. So I've learned a few new things along the way, as I hope everybody who's tuned in. I would encourage people, if you have questions, we will be coming to questions at the end of the panel. You can do that via the Q&A, or you can join the conversation online at #123 online safety, which is already trending in Ireland. So we're already stimulating a conversation, and hopefully we'll bring people together on what is needed to ensure that we have the robust mechanism that we all wish to have for online safety and within this bill that is being proposed. But I want to continue on our panel discussion, and I'm delighted Peter mentioned the work of the Ombudsman for Children's Office and Dr. Niall Muldoon, and I'm delighted that we're joined by the Head of Policy, Dr. Karen Mccauley this morning. She's Head of Policy with the Ombudsman for Children's Office, so she basically leads their work on all the advice that they give in this area and on public policies that affect children's rights and their welfare. She's over 15 years experience in the field of children's rights, having done numerous roles within the NGO sector and within the Ombudsman for Children's Office. So Karen, I'm going to ask you to share with us some of your general observations about the general scheme, and if you have any concerns about the absence of an individual complaints mechanism. So Karen, over to you.
There, sorry, I was on mute there. Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Gillian, and thanks very much to the Children's Rights Alliance for inviting the Ombudsman for Children's Office to take part in this morning's event. We really welcome it. Our engagement as an office with developments relating to the general scheme of the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill has focused on proposals for the establishment of an Online Safety Commissioner and therefore on Part 4 of the current scheme. From our perspective, the proposal set out in the general scheme to establish a regulatory framework for online safety to address both the spread and amplification of harmful online content do represent an important opportunity to strengthen the protection of children from such content. However, this is not to suggest that the establishment of an Online Safety Commissioner can on its own address the challenges that the online environment presents in relation to children's rights, and nor is it to suggest that the proposal set out under Part 4 of the general scheme do not require further refinement. In this regard, we do believe that elements of Part 4 do need further attention, and one of these elements concerns the proposed approach to complaints handling. As many of you will know, Part 4 of the general scheme sets out a range of powers for the proposed Media Commission in relation to harmful and age-inappropriate online content. Broadly speaking, the framework provides the Commission with compliance, enforcement and sanction powers. More specifically, it's proposed that the Commission will be tasked with a number of things, with preparing online safety codes that designated online services will be obliged to abide by, with assessing compliance by online services with these codes, with developing guidance materials in relation to harmful and age-inappropriate online content, with issuing advisory notices that provide advice about discrete or topical matters relating to harmful or age-inappropriate content, importantly, with auditing complaints and issues handling by online services where this could result in the Commission issuing a compliance notice to an online service, and with establishing a systemic complaint scheme to enable systemic issues about online services to be brought to the Commission by nominated bodies. And as the general scheme indicates, it's envisaged that these proposed regulatory tools will interact with one another. In other words, they're not mutually exclusive of each other. As an office, we welcome the suggestion that among the codes which the Commission may develop is a code focused on user complaints handling mechanisms operated by designated online services. From our extensive experience of discharging our own statutory complaints function, we believe that where possible, local resolution of complaints serves service users, including children, well, and therefore its practical measures directed towards supporting good complaints handling practice by service providers themselves are really important as regards facilitating the appropriate, effective and swift local resolution of complaints. We also welcome the proposals which provide the Commission with the authority to audit user complaint handling mechanisms operated by online services and to issue corresponding compliance notices to services. It appears to us that this role has the potential to enable the Commission to take a proactive, targeted and agile approach to addressing issues of concern that come to its attention, and in the process to ensure that online services complaints handling mechanisms are effective. We do have concerns, however, about the proposals for a systemic complaint scheme. Because the general scheme tasks the Commission with devising the systemic scheme, very limited information is provided in the general scheme itself about what this complaint scheme may look like in practice, including as regards which specific bodies may ultimately be designated as nominated bodies, what types of expertise it's envisaged such bodies will have, how these bodies will be resourced and supported to fulfil the role proposed for them, and how these bodies will determine which complaints or issues may be notified to the Commission. While we're not suggesting that the idea of putting in place a systemic complaint scheme is inherently flawed, the limited information available about it does make it very difficult to assess whether or not this approach is appropriate and likely to be effective. Furthermore, we are concerned that the proposed systemic scheme is not sufficiently aligned with relevant European and international standards and may not uphold children's right to an effective remedy. In a 2003 general comment on general measures for implementing the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child makes the point, and it's an important one, that for rights to have meaning, effective remedies must be available to redress violations. In this regard, the committee notes that the children's special and dependent status creates real difficulties for them in pursuing remedies for breaches of their rights. Therefore, the committee advises that states need to give particular attention to ensuring that there are effective, child-sensitive procedures available to children and their representatives. According to the committee, these procedures should include access to independent complaints procedures. In March this year, the UN Committee published a new general comment on children's rights in relation to the digital environment. And in this general comment, the UN Committee makes it clear that states should ensure that the mandates of national human rights institutions and other appropriate independent institutions cover children's rights in the digital environment, and that they are able to receive, investigate and address complaints from children and their representatives. Furthermore, the committee advises that states should ensure that appropriate and effective remedial judicial and non-judicial mechanisms for violations of children's rights in this area are widely known and readily available to all children. Complaint and reporting mechanisms, they suggest, should be free of charge, safe, confidential, responsive, child-friendly and available in accessible formats. Similar notes are struck in a 2018 recommendation from the Council of Europe on children's rights in the digital environment. And in this regard, the Council of Europe recommends that fulfilling children's right to an effective remedy in relation to this environment needs to entail the provision of available, known, accessible, affordable and child-friendly avenues through which children, as well as their parents or legal representatives, may submit complaints and seek remedies. Furthermore, the Council of Europe recommends that in addition to ensuring that redress is available through the courts, Member States should also provide children with non-judicial mechanisms to seek remedy, where these mechanisms include institutions or mechanisms responsible, again, for receiving, investigating and addressing complaints from children. When measured against these standards, our key concern is that what's currently provided for under Part 4 falls short. Our understanding is that the decision not to provide for the Commission to receive and deal with individual complaints is primarily pragmatic and grounded in concerns that the Commission may be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of complaints that could come to it. While this concern is understandable, and it is important to acknowledge that such a scenario would not serve anyone, including children, well, the difficulty with the current proposals from our perspective is that they risk creating an important gap in protection. In circumstances where a person's complaint is not resolved by an online service, no direct, clear and readily accessible pathway is being put in place for a person to bring their complaint directly to the Commission, let alone on the understanding that the Commission may be able to examine or investigate it. The current proposals don't provide for the establishment of the Media Commission as an ombuds organisation. However, it is perhaps worth noting that the Data Protection Commission, for example, which is not an ombuds office per se, can deal with individual complaints. Furthermore, it's striking, we think, that under the general scheme, the proposed Media Commission will be able to deal with individual complaints about linear broadcasting and on-demand audiovisual media services. So there's an inconsistency within the legislation itself on the whole matter of complaints. To conclude, in the interest of ensuring that children's right to an effective remedy is fully upheld by the provisions made in the legislation, we would like to see consideration being given to how an individual complaints handling role in relation to online services might be integrated into the legislation in a way that complements the other relevant provisions made and that also mitigates against the risk of the Commission being overwhelmed by complaints. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen, for giving us that insight from the Ombudsman for Children's Office and the highlighting the importance of an effective remedy, as you have outlined, and also the inconsistencies within the bill. I think were really informative to everybody who's viewing this today. I'm coming to the last, but certainly not the least speaker. Anybody who knows Nolene Blackwell would never even dare say that in her company, let alone if she wasn't in the room. But I'm delighted that Nolene is joining us to help us understand of what will the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill mean for children. And Nolene is bringing her experience as a human rights lawyer, as Chief Executive of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, which works to prevent the harm and heal the trauma of sexual violence. She's previously worked as Director of FLAC, the Free Legal Advice Centres, and as a solicitor in private practice. And she's been a member of different boards, the Commission on the Future of Policing. So Nolene is bringing all of this expertise together. But what I love about Nolene is she'll say it the way it is, but it'll be legally sound and robust, so it will be evidence. So Nolene, can you outline for us the importance of the bill being fit for purpose and maybe respond to some of the concerns about setting up an individual complaints mechanism, including people have said, oh, well, you know, oh, they're just going to receive so many complaints, it's not a viable option. So I'd be really interested in hearing your insights.
Right, thanks a million, Gillian. Thanks, that was a very nice introduction, but I'm really grateful to be part of this initiative of led by the Children's Rights Alliance and working with other colleagues in the area as well, because for us, working in the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, in some ways, our focus isn't specifically on children, but what we are focused on is the harm that is done by sexual exploitation, by sexual abuse, and so much of this, as everybody who's on this particular conference call will know, is happening online now. And in some ways, we're protecting our own butt. We run the National 24-hour helpline. We provide therapy for people and counselling services. And for all of these reasons, it is in our interest that the harm that can be done online is reduced. Okay, if it was got rid of, that would be great, but at least reduced, and that there are ways in which regulation happens. So we very much welcome the fact that the Oireachtas is looking at an online safety and media regulation bill, because just coming back to base, the assertion that is sometimes made by online platforms and media that they are neutral is, to my mind, highly challengeable. In other words, I don't believe it. But anyway, that's my view. They are important commercial players. They can manipulate how information is produced, and more importantly, how it is shared. And they can regulate that in their own way, in a way that is very opaque and in a way that is not consistent across the platform. So each of them do it in their own way. As a result of being an important commercial player, they are like the banks or any other important commercial player. The state recognizes its duty to regulate them, but it is not easy. And nobody, I certainly think, have to pay tribute to all those who are on the Oireachtas committee that are looking into this in such depth, trying to get their head around all of the aspects of this highly important commercial activity, and then its impact on the people in the state, and particularly those who are vulnerable for any reason, including those who are vulnerable by reason of age, by being children, and who are particularly vulnerable to harm. And the problem for the Oireachtas and the problem for this legislation then is how the state also maintains its obligation to do what Karen talked about there, to protect and defend and promote the rights of the people who live in this land, and ensure, amongst other things, that right to an effective remedy, not just a remedy. And to my mind, part of our reason for joining this campaign was, couldn't really, why we're so interested in today's webinar is, can't really get around how come nobody has ever recognized that there has to be an individual complaints mechanism if we are to protect the rights of individuals. So kind of bopping around a little bit, and maybe in what I was going to say, I want to turn to what Karen was saying about the systemic complaints mechanism, which is, as I understand it, and there isn't much in it, but that, you know, NGOs, for instance, would be able to bring a complaint, would be able to bring a set of complaints. And I could see us, again, in our own interest, being one of those organizations that might be nominated as someone that could bring complaints to the Commission. That is fine. We don't mind having the opportunity to bring issues to organizations. But when I realize how a helpline that we have had for 40 years is still not recognized by everybody as a way to talk about issues, when I realize how hard it is to talk about issues where you may feel ashamed, you may feel it's your own fault, you may feel you don't want anyone else to know, and now you're being asked to be mediated through another gatekeeper into something that is your right. And that is your right to privacy, your right to be protected, your right to a safe environment. And under this systemic complaint, you would have to, first of all, make your case to an NGO or to some other designated body who might and then might not consider it serious enough to raise as a complaint mechanism. That is a remedy, of course it is. It is not an effective remedy. And particularly where it is hard for people in areas where it's hard to complain, and the abuse that happens online is abuse that is often very hard to talk about. It's often hard to see, it's hard to explain, and in terms of investigation of it, that's going to be difficult enough without having to do it possibly twice or 3 times. So in that way, I can't understand how it hasn't been recognized that there is a need for people to have direct access to a commission. And again, both Ombudsman's office explained the value of complaints for so many. And one of the other commissions that I was just looking at in preparation for this is the Utilities Commission. I don't know that that is the correct name, but it regulates energy and water. I think it is the Commission on Utilities. Water and energy are things that are absolutely crucial to everybody. And they have an individual complaints mechanism where, of course, you have to complain to the provider first, try to get it fixed at that level. Even the Ombudsman wants you to do that. Our Ombudsman needs us to do that as well, I think, Peter. But, you know, so in those commissions, you first of all have to try and have a system in place that each of the platforms would have their own complaint mechanism, and hopefully would resolve the complaint at that level. And you would only move to maybe a complaint to the Commission if that was not satisfactory for all sorts of reasons. If it was taking too long, if it wasn't clear how to do it, if it was too hard to do it. And there you could build in things like the Ombudsman was talking about standard complaint mechanisms, model complaint mechanisms. So you can have systems in place that allow people to complain. And anyone that has that sort of a complaints mechanism is clear that if they're taking it seriously, they can deal not only with that complaint, but with other similar complaints. So picking up on something that Peter said about finding an IT system wasn't working properly, that's great when it happens. So while we wouldn't mind having a capacity for systemic complaints, whereby organizations like us could see trends and could pass them on to a commission, we say that is no substitute for people being able to have a remedy in a case where their rights are absolutely engaged. And and where their rights are engaged and where the harm is so real and can be so devastating. So the other point that Peter made, so having had two such brilliant speakers, all I have to do is pick up on what both of them are saying to some extent, which is great. But I won't spend much longer doing that so that people can come back in. But Peter mentioned how much it is that people just want to get it fixed. And I can't tell you how important I've seen that to be, not only in this role, but in previous roles as well. For the most part, people don't want to go into formal processes. They just want it to stop. If you take areas like sexual harassment and abuse, that is as true there. There will never be a case where everyone will want to complain sexual violence of all sorts. But because an awful lot of it, it is enough that the harm stops. So you need systems in place to allow the harm to stop. Judicial review, which is one of the most complex, expensive, difficult, inaccessible processes, which is the way that this will come about if we don't put in an individual complaints mechanism against the system, is no way to get something to stop. It won't be used in the case of online harm because so much of it is private. And the last thing you want is it blasted all over the newspapers. That might be okay in the case where you're a member of the English team. It is not all right if you're an individual who's already harmed. So the failure to put in such a system means that you will leave people not only at risk of harm, but people are being harmed already. So you will leave them with unregulated harm and with effectively no way of reporting it. They will be silenced without the provision of an individual complaints mechanism. They will be subject to having the energy at a time where they're already being harmed to come along to organizations like the Children's Rights Alliance or the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, or maybe go to the Ombudsman and see what that is when they're worn out already. And where they don't have an access to the Ombudsman, except perhaps through education or something. That is wrong. It's not a situation where the rights of children or anybody actually is being properly protected in the state. And therefore it is something that if it isn't addressed, because I just haven't heard the answer, what do you do to protect those rights of every individual if you don't have an individual complaints mechanism? And that piece has not been answered in any of the many, many words that have been said about this already. I will leave it at that as well. Yeah, I leave that, but thanks for being part of this. I'm happy to stay and throw in my tuppence worth later. Thanks.
Excellent. No, and Nolene, I just want to echo your words about remedy. You know, anybody I've ever met, I've dealt with complaints at different levels. And what's at the heart is people are looking for remedy. They're not looking for a drawn out process. They don't want to necessarily have to enter these processes, but they do so because they haven't got remedy at that earliest opportunity. And that's why we need these different ways that people can get remedy. And I think if we all think of our daily lives, Nolene, you mentioned about banks, actually, if we look at most aspects of our daily lives, there is some regulator, there is an ombudsman, there's oversight to ensure that as a member of the public, I am cared for in getting those services that I am accessing. And yet, when it comes to online, we seem to think because it's online, somehow it should be treated differently. Sometimes I think on the issue of bullying and it's treated differently, that it's cyberbullying. It is bullying, and we need to make sure, obviously, the mechanism that is being used is different. But sometimes I think we get, oh, well, it's new and these big companies. And we all know, and I've worked previously in the private sector, is none of us are good at being self-regulation. So I will drive my car, but I will keep within the speed limit because I know I'm going to be checked on my speed limit. And we know that we all need, whether we're a private company, an individual citizen, we need certain agreement of what is the framework. And I think that's what we're trying to explore here today. So I want to move to some questions. I want to encourage those who are tuned in to ask questions through the Q&A or join the conversation online with the hashtag 123OnlineSafety. You can ask questions there, or if you have found, as I have found, such compelling already, or individual speakers, please do add your voice to calling for an individual complaints mechanism, or if there's something that you would like to see within this bill, use that hashtag, tag in maybe your local politicians. As a former senator, I would certainly encourage you, make sure your voice is heard, because when this comes to the bill coming into law, what we really want to ensure is that every citizen of this state, every person living in Ireland will have an opportunity, if they feel that they've exhausted the other avenues, that they have somewhere to go for remedy. Obviously, we all would hope that remedy happens at an earlier opportunity, but if it doesn't, we need to ensure that there's an effective mechanism. And on that, Julie, I'd like to explore with you, and if you could talk us through, what would an individual complaints mechanism look like?
I think it's, bits and pieces have been mentioned by the other speakers, but effectively what we are proposing is something similar to what's already been mentioned. So first of all, the person who might have experienced, say, cyberbullying online, if we take a young person, would first have to go to the platform concerned. So whatever platform that is, they'd have to make a complaint. And as Noeline mentioned, it's if that complaint isn't dealt with satisfactorily, if it's not dealt with at all, if it's taking too long, or if they can't understand the process, they would then be able to go and make a complaint to the Online Safety Commissioner. What we're proposing that would happen at this point is that the Online Safety Commissioner would do a preliminary look at the case. So they would check, have they been to the platform? Have they gone through all the process they should have done? And if they, and really primarily, I suppose, does the content fall within their powers? So is it something that they can actually deal with? That it's something that is related to online safety and that falls within the legislation. If all that is checked off as being done, then they would move on then to an investigation. And then as part of this investigation, what the Online Safety Commissioner would look at is the way in which the platform has handled the complaint. So they would talk and try to come to a resolution informally, as has been mentioned by both Peter and by Karen, between the platform and the person who made the complaint. Then if that does not happen, they would then have the power to issue a binding decision. And what that would be then is, for example, might include takedown, so that they could say, well, look, actually, we think you should have to take down that material about the young person that they've complained about. That is essentially what we're proposing. It's quite a simple mechanism, and it's proven with other bodies to have really, really effective results. So, for example, we know that it's similar enough to what the Ombudsman for Children and the Ombudsman will both employ themselves. And really what we're looking for is, as everyone has mentioned, a quick, fast, effective remedy. But also behind all that, as has been mentioned, the Online Safety Commissioner having the power to make sure that actually when a person makes a complaint in the first instance of the platform, that complaints mechanism is as effective as possible. We want as few people as possible, I suppose, using an individual complaints mechanism. What we'd love to see is that if someone has something said about them online, some sort of harm, that they'd report to the platform and it'd be sorted. But in those instances where it can't be, that they'd have this easy, accessible mechanism to get it dealt with quickly, effectively, and in a way that makes sure that their rights are respected and protected. So that's essentially what we're looking for as a campaign.
And I'm going to just ask you, what is currently in the proposed legislation? So there is no individual. Just for everybody to be absolutely clear, why are we being so hard on this issue today? So
currently in the legislation, the only thing that is there is that if a super complaints mechanism, a systematic complaints mechanism, as they'd call it, so that would be a body such as the NGOs, is what they mentioned, could, if they're seeing trends or issues, raise that with the Online Safety Commissioner. So there's absolutely no way for an individual to have a line of communication to be able to knock on the door of any other body other than the courts if something is said about them online. There's absolutely nothing provided.
Yeah, which is a real significant gap in that it's expecting that as an individual that I would go to an NGO but then I need to be lucky that we all go to the same NGO or the mix of NGOs. You know, it just for me, we'll probe it a little further. But I want to move over to you, Peter, to ask you, drawing on your experience, because I think it is very important for people to hear about that informal resolution piece, that it, you know, not everything ends up with a report. And I think that is the significance of having an online safety commissioner that really has powers that can ensure those remedies at that earliest opportunity that we can. But maybe to be looking at the effect that an individual complaints mechanisms will have on an individual's ability to get resolution. So I would really welcome your insights.
Yes, it seems to me that without the capacity for the individual to bring complaints, if things aren't resolved locally, and from time to time they won't be, then effectively they will go unresolved. There will be no means for, in this particular context, a young person to actually get the issue resolved. Now, for me, as the point's been made several times, and I introduced myself just this, the notion is most people want something fixed. I used to use the example of somebody would complain to us that the central heating in their council house wasn't working. They do not want us to conduct a detailed investigation and come back with a report 6 months later. What they actually want is a plumber. And thankfully, we're able to do that from time to time. And I think that's really important. The length of time taken to resolve some of these issues is also a crucial component. And I think reflecting on what Nolene said, people often just want it to stop, or they want whatever is going wrong to be put right. They're not necessarily looking for an outcome in terms of redress that goes beyond having it fixed. The important thing to say, though, when you are using these kind of mechanisms is that if the commissioner has that power, and I think they should have, because it's much the most effective way, and sometimes when my office will get in touch with an organization which has been recalcitrant, the mere fact that the Ombudsman is on the phone can have quite a salutary impact on their response. So I wouldn't underestimate the capacity to get things done when a third party intervenes, particularly one with authority. But the final point I'd want to make on it is that you have to capture the learning from the resolution. So any commissioner would need to make sure that if they were resolving a series of issues, that they were still mindful that they might be indicative of a systemic trend, or that they might be, for instance, demonstrating failings in a particular platform's response to complaints. So I think it is the most useful way. It's important that people know that they can get a quick response, but that it has to be integrated into the learning mechanisms that form part of this.
Okay, I fully endorse what you're saying, and it's great drawing on the experience that you have. Karen, do you think children will use this system? Will parents use this system if there was an individual complaints mechanism in place? Can you draw from your experience?
I think they will, but I think it's going to take time. I think none of us can afford to be naive about that. I imagine that there's a lot of expectation we brought to bear on the Commission and the Online Safety Commissioner as and when established. And I think people would probably expect that they'll be able to bring complaints to the Commission. It'd be a rude awakening if they find out they can't. But I think it's important to understand, and again, drawing on our own experience of dealing with complaints made by children, but also crucially on their behalf over the last 15 plus years, it can take a lot for a person to make a complaint. You know, people don't make complaints lightly. And they're obviously, as Peter was saying and Nolene was saying, when they are making complaints, they're often raising issues that are very personal, very sensitive, and they can be in a state of real distress and upset. And in those circumstances, it is very important to put in place, and this is where the individual complaints mechanism really matters, an avenue that is readily available, readily accessible, and that is known to people, to members of the public, including children and young people. In respect to children and young people themselves, in our experience, and again, I don't think this is particular to children and young people, I think this just applies to people generally, but there are very basic things. You know, they need to know, who can I bring a complaint to, and that needs to be clear. You know, they don't need layers. They don't need if this, then that, maybe the next thing. They need to be very clear about who they can bring to the complaint to, what they can complain about, and how their complaint is going to be dealt with. And crucially within that, and again, I don't think this is specific to children, but I think it's very important in their case, they need to have confidence and trust in the process. You know, they need to know that they're going to be listened to. They need to know that there's a point to making a complaint, and they need to know that if they do raise issues, that they'll be taken seriously, that they'll be respected, and that the institution or the person they're bringing the complaint to is in a position to do something about it, and they'll be supported, you know, with the complaint. So I think they will avail of an individual complaints mechanism. I think it's far more, but it'll take time. I'd have real concerns though about, in terms of what's proposed, whether children, young people in particularly, but also more generally, adults, people will avail of what's being proposed, because it does look very remote, it looks complex, and for the most part, it looks very unclear. If you don't know if you make a complaint where it's going, do you bother making it in the first place?
Absolutely. Nolene, to move to you before I see the questions are flooding in, so I promise you I'm coming to the individual questions shortly. But listening to the expertise that we have here today from the Ombudsman, from the Ombudsman for Children's Office, and it's great for us to have this expertise and adding their voices to the work of the Children's Rights Alliance. Is there examples that we could also draw from of best practice when it comes to regulating big tech platforms that we could also draw on in this debate?
Well, you see, I think we have loads of them already. So for instance, in my last gig, when I was working with FLAC, we had a lot to do with people who were in debt at the moment, and we were looking at the Financial Services and Pensions Ombudsman as it is now. It didn't have pensions when I was there at the time. And that was a regulatory function which I had lots of complaints about at the time. But at the same time, it was set up, and in some ways, what a good commission will do is actually it will train and help the platforms or the institutions themselves to build good practices to deal with things, because that's what we found was that, and I found that with the Ombudsman as well in dealings with them over the time, is that people got better at handling complaints before they went to the Ombudsman or before they go to the Commission. And so that will be really valuable for each of the institutions themselves. I see why they don't want it. I can see that because it is easier for them to have autonomy about how they deal with complaints. Actually, I don't know they don't want it. It's just not in the bill. And I presume if they'd lobbied for it, it would have been in the bill. But if they accepted it in the spirit in which I think it could work on their behalf, people will get a better service from the platform. Platforms are all about sharing. They're all about giving information. But the truth is, certainly those who come onto our helpline are not able to get through. They don't know why their complaint hasn't been followed up. They don't know why it's taken so long. But even the existence of an ombudsman and an individual complaints mechanism would help us when we're dealing with people who are hurt to know that, for instance, this is actually considered okay. I know you're upset by it, but it's considered okay. So there's value for everybody in this system. I think in some ways we have, and you know, we've been given here some of the models that we could need. That model process that the Ombudsman built up a number of years ago has been really useful to a lot of people designing complaints processes. The helpline that this Ombudsman put in was really helpful in getting people to understand what they could do next. So I think we have the capacity internally to set up a good system building on other regulatory and ombudsman processes. And we can see how it is done elsewhere, but we also have them here, and it is in everybody's interest. And the problem is, how do the people of the land access their right to an effective remedy without it?
Okay, I'm going to jump into some of the questions that have been coming in, and I would encourage everybody to continue putting in questions or join the debate online at #123OnlineSafety. I'm looking at the different, it's great to see so much support. And I want to actually move to, we have at least 2 Oireachtas members who are on the media committee who are looking at this bill, have joined in this conversation, have asked questions. Malcolm Byrne, Deputy Malcolm Byrne, who has said on Twitter that he supports the establishment of an online safety commissioner, and we need to establish an appropriate individual complaints mechanism. I hope when he's using the word appropriate, Malcolm, you're respecting the work of the Children's Rights Alliance, and the debate we're having here this morning, I think, really frames it appropriately. But one of the questions that Malcolm has put in is that a major challenge is the definition of online harm, and how this will determine the threshold for an individual complaint. How will the panel define online harm? And I also want to take, there's a question in from Deputy Johnny Mighton, who says, do you think once the complaint reaches the Commissioner that the complaint should be taken down immediately while being investigated? And he refers to a case where it was 2 years before the harmful content was removed. So we have 2 questions. So which of my panelists would like to jump in first? Nolene, are you oh yeah, Julie, you're going to jump in for me here.
Yeah, so I'll take the question on online harm first. So I suppose really what is critical is that the definition is comprehensive enough that it can capture the changing nature of the online world, so that we don't, I suppose, have it too rigid that we might not capture all the different harms. I mean, the current definition in the general scheme captures both what is criminal, so that would include things that fall under other pieces of legislation like Code Goes Law, but then it also has content that has the effect of being intimidating, threatening, humiliating, or persecuting to a person. So that would encompass quite a lot of content that we would see young people coming to our members who are part of our campaign concerned about. And then it also looks then at that which can promote eating disorders and self-harm or suicide. And really, I suppose the definition that is there at the moment is quite comprehensive. I mean, it can always be added to, but I think what really is needed is a definition that is comprehensive, but also that is loose enough that can include the different types of emerging harms that might occur for children and young people. Part of this, I think, though, will be the codes of conduct, so the roles that they will play and how they can help further define what is in the legislation. The legislation is in effect the starting point. I think the codes of conduct, and they will be developed as in the general scheme at the moment in consultation both with children and young people, but also with platforms themselves. So in that process, the Online Safety Commissioner could find definitions that are workable.
Okay, and then moving to the second question that came in, and perhaps either Peter or Karen, you might wish to talk to us about that remedy piece, because, you know, if there is a complaint and it's been investigated, sometimes, you know, the processes take time. So what happens to content, or is it the deterrent of having the process in place? Peter.
It's a difficult enough question to answer, because should you be looking for an outcome before you've considered the position? But I think when you look at the potential nature of the harm, then I think having the power to have damaging or potentially damaging posts removed while the investigation is ongoing would seem to make complete sense. It doesn't seem to be justifiable to allow a disputed item to remain in position if it is going to take some time to reach a conclusion.
And perhaps this could be built into the powers of the Online Safety Commissioner to make judgment calls, because I've no doubt that there may be differences. You know, we all know that there may be, you know, that there may be an initial approach.
It would indeed need to be, if it were to work, it would need to be formally built into powers.
Powers, yeah. Karen, you wish to add your voice there.
Yeah, no, just in relation to that, I think it's actually a really important question, but also as Peter's saying, it's quite difficult. To be quite frank with you, I don't know, legally speaking, I'm sure there are those who do, whether it is permissible to remove a piece of content subject to an investigation. But I think the key thing is that we're talking about material that can be potentially a source of huge distress to people, and the longer it's there, that can compound the distress. It also allows for its proliferation across platforms and continued sharing. So really, from a child's perspective, from a person's perspective, who's subject to content, there's a source of considerable distress. What they want to see is, and I think the others have said this earlier, they want to see it gone. You know, as Peter said, you want to see the heating fixed. You don't want to go into a big process. So what they want to see is it removed, and if it's possible to do that in a way that it's removed subject to investigation, I think that would make perfect sense, as Peter said.
Absolutely, and I would hope that if you really have an online safety commissioner with the appropriate powers, a robust mechanism, that in itself may act as a deterrent, as Nolene pointed out, about organisations then ensuring that they have the procedures in place to deal with this in a timely manner, because no doubt when it came to the official complaints mechanism, the time it took for remedy would be part of the examination of that issue. Nolene, I want to go to you, but I want to add in another question that has come in from Mike from the Oireachtas on the extent of seemingly ever increasing, in his words, revenge-based harm on social media among young people has played or is playing a role in the thinking behind the need to set up an individual complaints mechanism. So I would like to hear your views on that.
Yeah, so that is becoming that what we kind of tend to call, because it's so rarely revenge, actually, it's that non-consensual sharing of intimate images is just it has become a big issue, particularly I think for young people, but it has become a big issue. And sometimes it is done without thought, and sometimes it is done with malice aforethought, for certain, sure. And it is one of the ways in which, as well, when we engage, because I do want to make this point as well, some of the platforms are really interested in engaging with us, in having us as what they would call in various ways trusted partners who could maybe get in fast into a complaints mechanism to take stuff down. For a lot of that, because again, the length of time that something stays up can be crucially important to the ultimate sharing of it. But I would say that while we're happy to be that trusted partner or to help people who contact us, we are no substitute for people having a direct, effective contact themselves to it. But these things, we are finding that people's experience of how they're dealt with by the platforms varies from platform to platform. There is, of course, and we have to recognize it, a very extensive argument being made for the right of people to express themselves freely and to express opinions freely. And this is the debate that you will see pushed with a lot of power at European level in particular, but certainly the level of abuse that non-consensual sharing of intimate images can do, the level of harm that it can cause is huge. And it's one of the reasons why this has to be regulated. The platforms, going back to my basic point on this, is they're not neutral. Sharing of intimate images shares faster. There is more commercial value in those kind of abusive images than there is in some less abusive images. So there is a commercial incentive to not take down harmful material, although the platforms we deal with, when it's brought to their attention, will do their best to take it down. But that's not a viable, that's a patch, it's not a solution.
Absolutely. Moving through these questions, one of the earliest questions that came into us is about the difference between the proposed role of the commissioner and that of a regulator. So, and it's coming from Tony from the Department of Education. So, for example, where will the threshold lie with regard to safety? If material is posted online is blatantly racist or offensive, but not actually unsafe, will the Commissioner have powers to sanction the person who posted the material or the platform that facilitated it? So who would like to take that question? Any of my panelists? Yeah, Julie and then Nolene. Oh, Nolene, go for it there, Nolene.
I'll just come in very briefly, Gillian, because I mean, Julie, I'm volunteering Julie on this one as well, even if she wasn't volunteering herself. But to my mind, like a regulator, this bill is mostly about regulation. There's only a very small bit, and there isn't even a set piece for a safety commissioner. In some ways, it's a proposal that there isn't a set post of safety commissioner. One of the commissioners may have responsibility for safety. So it's about regulation, but regulators, like, to my mind, they're not that separate, because where you have regulation, the regulator has direct powers, but then the regulator also has these indirect mechanisms to hear about complaints and also to manage complaints. So, but Julie, I could have it all wrong. That's part of the reason we're part of the Alliance as well, is CRA are doing a lot of work in minding our legal P's and Q's for us.
I don't think
Julie, I'll hand over.
I don't think anyone needs to mind Nolene's legal P's and Q's. She's the expert on most things. But I suppose they're looking at, in that question, I suppose, the difference between safety and harmful content. And what it currently has in the legislation, in the general scheme, is a definition of harmful content. And quite obviously, if something is illegal, it would still go to the Gardaí or the other people who'd be responsible for that. At the moment, there is no power to sanction persons, and I suppose really what we're looking for is something that's around looking at the platform. So not looking at the individual who posts it. If there's a sanction to be levied there, that would have to go through the Gardaí if it's criminal or other channels. But really, I suppose it's looking at the platforms and their responsibility. So pushing it back on the platforms to take their role really seriously. And really, I suppose what we would like to see happen is that there is a power to sanction the platforms. At the moment, the bill sets out a number of harms, but it doesn't give people any right of place to go to see those, if their harms are breached, to see those realized in terms of remedy. So that is really the issue. It sets up harms but doesn't give a remedy. And I suppose really when it comes to the definitions and where things lie borderline, that is again where those codes of conduct will come in as really important. That should help clarify those, but there will always be borderline cases, and the regulator and the Online Safety Commissioner will always have to keep learning, will keep having to adapt, and will have to see how they can make these as clear as possible for people who are trying to access it, but also for the platforms themselves to make it workable.
Absolutely. So looking, I see we have a comment in from Margaret Brennan, who's assistant professor at DCU. She's worked in this area of online child sexual abuse for almost 20 years, and she endorses that there should be a mechanism for individual complaints. She said there must be a robust understanding of the nature and impact on children, and also on making the reporting mechanism accessible and appealing to children who are made vulnerable online. So she's asking what we can do to make this case to legislators, and certainly what I would be saying to you, anybody who's tuned in, make your voice heard, contact your representatives, contact the Children's Rights Alliance, add your voice, join the conversation online at #123 online safety. It's really important. This is the time to make our voices heard, not in 2 years' time when hopefully we'll have an online safety commissioner and we'll be saying, I wish they had powers to have an individual complaints mechanism. Now is the opportunity. The window is ajar there. It's great that already we've seen Oireachtas members engaging, but you really do need to make your voice heard. It is imperative, as Margaret is expressing. A question from Angela King is, with so many platforms across the globe and young people accessing them, will Irish legislation on this, with the systemic and individual mechanisms, have the power to issue binding decision in other jurisdictions, or will it be confined to those in Ireland? So Julie, would you be able to help me on this one?
So just, I suppose, at the moment,
Yeah.
there is no individual complaints mechanism included in the general scheme, so there'd be no powers anywhere, both in Ireland or across Europe. Currently, I suppose, in the general scheme, it is unclear. What we would say is that that's one of the things that needs to be clarified, is the reach of the Online Safety Commissioner. That we know that there's things going on in Europe. They're looking at establishing new online safety regulation in the coming years. And I think what is really key is that Ireland has the opportunity to really set the standard here. We have so many of the platforms here in Ireland. By having a robust commissioner with robust codes of practice and an individual complaints mechanism, we do have the powers to set standard. And the bill, when the next iteration of the bill, will need to expand, I suppose, on the reach of the Online Safety Commissioner. That is one of those things, and Karen may be able to come in on this as well, that I think is unclear at the moment within the general scheme as it's currently set out.
Karen, do you wish to?
No, I don't actually have anything particularly further to add to that. That's okay. I think Julie set it out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I feel particularly strongly, you know, as Ireland, we're very proud to host so many online companies in Ireland. And I join in that pride that we host these companies. But I actually think as a European, as a citizen, we also have an obligation on us to set standards in relation to ensuring that we have laws. And in Ireland, we like to be the leaders on certain things, and on online, we really want to be seen this leader, but we need to be doing it in online safety as well as in hosting the companies, and show that it is compatible. Because Nolene rightly pointed, there are companies who have the appetite for dealing with this. Obviously, there are commercial interests, but I think we can strike a balance to ensure that we show leadership on this issue. So for me, this is a real opportunity for Ireland on the international stage to really show what it means to be hosting of these companies, is that we take that economic input that we have into our country, also a responsibility that we have as a member of the European Union, as a leader in the world, you know, sitting on the Security Council at the UN. Ireland should be up front and centre on this issue. Nolene, you wish to join in?
Yeah, you know, that was great, actually. I've nearly forgotten because that was so good. That was a great point. But the other point is just in relation to this, the regulation is going to happen anyway. What this bill is implementing an EU-wide directive. So the regulation is going to happen. The problem right now is that the regulation is going to happen without adequate safeguards, in our view, for the rights of the people of Ireland. So, you know, it's not a question, will we or won't we regulate? It's a question, do we build in the necessary, crucial human rights elements that allow people safety?
Absolutely. Julie.
And just to come in with an international example that I don't think we've mentioned, and I know we in the campaign use quite a lot, is that of Australia. So currently Australia, one of the only countries to have an individual complaints mechanism that has been up and running for quite some time. And I suppose their reach in terms of how they will regulate and how they will have individual complaints relates only to those in Australia. However, they do have a soft power, similar to what was mentioned by Peter earlier, in that they can write a letter to a company that isn't hosted in Australia, or in relation to someone maybe outside of Australia who makes a complaint. And I suppose that sometimes can have that effect of a third party intervening and potentially, you know, maybe making some sort of a difference that can happen. So I suppose it's just good to look outside of Ireland and outside of the European Union at what is being done elsewhere and how we can draw on that experience as well.
Absolutely. We're coming close to the end. I can't believe the time is almost gone on us. It's not the end of the conversation on this issue. It's just the end of today's conversation. There's a lot of work to be done on this bill. But one of the questions I would like to turn to Peter and to Karen is from Maria McLaughlin on how would the complaints process be recorded? You know, trying to understand, would providers be expected to provide reports of complaints received? So maybe drawing your experience, I'm not saying that you're going to outline exactly how this bill would see it, but how do we know if people are reporting to the providers? What type of mechanisms could you foresee? Peter?
I think I alluded to the fact that having standardization in complaints mechanisms gives you a hugely valuable source of knowledge about what's happening, both in terms of how individual complaints are being dealt with, but also in terms of any trends in complaints that need to be addressed, whether about individual platforms or about individual complaint topics. Also issues around effectiveness, how many, what proportion of complaints are leading to action. So for me, it seems that it would be very worthwhile if you're planning an individual safety commissioner to give them the power to regulate complaints mechanisms to the extent that they could specify those complaint mechanisms and then give you comparability from one platform to another as to how they're dealing with issues. You look at where that works effectively. If I just step inside the Ombudsman community, several Ombudsman offices now in these islands have the power to set standard complaints mechanisms. Scotland were the first to have that power. And the former Ombudsman there at the time said it was the most effective tool for improving public services that was available to his office. So I would not underestimate how significant it is. And I think if you are putting forward proposals and if there is a willingness to accept proposals from the Oireachtas, then it would be very well worthwhile putting some powers in to enable the Commissioner to specify the standard means by which platforms had to deal with complaints.
Okay. And Karen.
Yeah, maybe perhaps just building on what Peter was saying just there. As you know, under the current heads of the bill, what's suggested is that one of the codes that the Commission may be tasked with developing is around complaints handling. Now, it's not definite. It's not clear what it's going to look like in the bill. Arguably, given the independence of the Commission, it might not be appropriate to require the Commission to develop specific codes in advance of its establishment. But we do think that is a really important code that needs development. Again, it's not quite the same as what Peter's talking about. I appreciate that in terms of standard setting and models, but what it does provide is a context for building capacity among online services to deal with complaints in a person-centered, efficient and effective way that's aligned with good complaints handling practice generally. I think one of the other things that's quite interesting about what is there in the legislation is this idea that the Commission will have the power to audit online services in relation to their complaints handling. So they will be able, and they'll be able to do that. There's an agility built in. So where, for example, concerns, complaints brought to them directly and indirectly, I know that's what today's conversation is about, but they do have auditing powers, which means they'll be able to go in there and see what's going on, and they'll be learning from that as well. I think it'll be useful.
Okay, we're coming close to the end, and I want to be giving the panel an opportunity if there's any words or if they're scrolling through the questions that we haven't got to answer, which I know will be brought into the Children's Rights Alliance and built into their work. So I'm really sorry that we haven't answered all of the questions that are there, but I guarantee you that they will be looked at, and the Children's Rights Alliance will ensure that, as I said, they'll draw it into their work and hopefully feedback out. On mentioning that about the Children's Rights Alliance, I just encourage everybody who's tuned in, hopefully you're a member through an organization, but if not, like me, you could become an individual member of the Children's Rights Alliance to show your support for this campaign and the many other great work that the Children's Rights Alliance is doing. But I want to give a word to each of the panelists, if they would like to leave us with any parting words or reminders of the potential of this bill, of what we should be looking to. I'm going to leave it open to the panel. I'm going to take it in the same order that we did in the speaking order. So Julie, to you first.
Yeah, by way of conclusion, I think we just need to come out of this remembering that children and young people need to be centre to what we do in the space of online safety, and they expect and they want an individual complaints mechanism. They want somewhere that they can go, that they can identify to get a quick, fast and effective remedy. And that is what we need to have at the heart of this. And particularly we need to have our eye to the future and to look at how can we as Ireland set the trend and really show best practice in these areas and show that we take children's rights we take children's rights really, really seriously, particularly when it comes to the online world. Children and young people want to be safe, they want to be empowered, and they want to enjoy their space, and that's what we need to focus on.
Okay, and Peter.
Just seems to me that opportunities come along rarely. Opportunities to put new legislation in place, particularly so, and that getting it right first time is essential. So that the need now is that if there is to be an individual mechanism, that not only should work be done as it is being done to promote it, but also that great thought should be given to what powers are necessary in order to make it work effectively, so that from the outset, there's something that people can turn to that will give them proper redress when they fail to resolve their complaints with the platforms.
Karen.
Yeah, I think I think that piece about opportunity is really important. And we have an opportunity now, rather than waiting and seeing, to get what I was saying earlier, is to get the fundamentals right. I suppose our organisation, like the Ombudsman's office, when you're established on the basis of legislation and you're working with that legislation day in, day out, you come to know how important it is that that legislation empowers you to be a credible, authoritative, trusted body, you know, and what we all want to see, I imagine, is this commission and the Online Safety Commissioner in specifically able to get off to a good start. And what we don't want to see is any impediments in the legislation. In other words, that it's not being placed on a sound statutory footing so that it's on the back foot from day one. That will not serve the commission well, and more to the point, it won't serve children and young people and members of the public generally well. So we have an opportunity here to get it right now. And really what I suppose we're saying is, we'd like to see, we understand the concerns about volumes of complaints, but look at that. Look at how you might be able to address that, rather than just writing off an individual complaints mechanism as to say that we don't know that they'll be overwhelmed by complaints, you know. So let's try and fix it before, rather than waiting to see, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And if there's complaints, there must be some issue there. It's hardly coming out of a vacuum. So Nolene.
Yeah, so I suppose the individual complaints mechanism that we're talking about is needed to address unaddressed issues of online harm. And we talk a lot about harm, and we talk very little about the impact of the harm. And online harm, very often, the harm is invisible to the physical eye. But it doesn't mean it's not extremely injurious and serious, and can impact a person their whole lives. And in particular, a child or young person in development, the impact can change for the worse, can be detrimental to their overall development, or make them more vulnerable, mean that their life is not the way it should be. And that's why, even now, having heard all the thought about it and having looked at some of the questions there, a lot of what we've been talking about is what would the shape of that individual complaints mechanism look like if we put it up? And that's fine. But the problem is, it's a hole, it's a big hole, it's not there at all. We can't address an awful lot of the questions because it's not conceived within the scheme of the legislation. And that is a question to which I think there is no reasonable and certainly no rights-based answer that I've heard so far.
Yeah, and absolutely, I would concur with you, Nolene, and I think you're right to remind us of that impact of harm, that we often talk about online harm, but we forget that impact on the individual and how the longevity of that impact and the shame that is often attached when it is not their shame to carry, but we as a society add that layer. In bringing it to a close, I do need to note that Deputy Malcolm Byrne has intervened again to reference to us that next week the Oireachtas Committee, on his request, will be having the Australian E-Safety Commissioner due to attend. So I think that's a really positive move by the committee, and he certainly encourages us all to join in to join in there and to listen in to see what happens. But I would encourage you to join with the Children's Rights Alliance and all the brilliant organisations that are working on this issue. As rightly pointed out by Peter and by Karen, there is an opportunity here to get it right. And this is an opportunity that those of us who have voices, who are willing to use our time, and I've no doubt of the commitment by the level of questions, the level of participants, brilliant participation we've had today. Let's get involved and let's get this right. Let's get this right for the people of Ireland. We have a real opportunity here to ensure that we have an online safety commissioner that has the powers as described by the expert inputs that we've had earlier. I think on Twitter, Tanya Ward, the Chief Executive of the Children's Rights Alliance, said, "It's simply not good enough that the government is contemplating putting an online safety commissioner in place with no teeth to help individual children and young people who are up against big tech." And I think that's a really compelling statement made by Tanya Ward, and I would certainly endorse that. I want to encourage everybody who's tuned in and encourage others, use your influence, multiply that, join in the debate online at the hashtag 123OnlineSafety, join in the Children's Rights Alliance. As I've outlined at the beginning, there's a brilliant group of organisations who are working on this campaign, along with the members of the Children's Rights Alliance. And I know that the funding from the Community Foundation for Ireland via the RTE Does Comic Relief Fund is really important, and I want to acknowledge that. So many NGOs will tell you we can't do the work without this vital funding sources to allow us to use this opportunity we have to influence. I want to thank our panel. You have been, I knew you were going to be good, okay? I did know this before I came in, given the caliber of people we have on the panel, but you passed my expectations. It has been such an informative, insightful panel that I hope will add to our knowledge and help us influence in the right way that this bill and legislation that comes into place will be effective and will do what we all wish it to do. And I do believe that there is a common understanding of what we wish the bill to do. So now let's work to make that happen. I certainly endorse the Children's Rights Alliance call for an individual complaints mechanism. I think it's vital. I think we've illustrated here how, one, it can work. Yes, it will not overwhelm a system. There are appropriate mechanisms. And actually, at the very starting point, it should be a deterrent, so as that it is used that the companies themselves, organizations, will have their own complaint systems in place to be able to deal with effectively, that it doesn't need this individual complaints mechanism, but we do need the safety of having the individual complaints mechanism there. That has to be there. Without that safety net, I think this bill, it's not an appropriate answer. So there is a lot of work to be done by our legislators. I have great faith in them. They have the summer period where I can testify they don't all go on holidays. Many take on work and extra reading. My encouragement is that they take this on as an issue to get it right. We have an opportunity here now, rather than in a few years' time coming back to this debate. Let's get this right. Thank you, everybody. If I didn't thank anybody, I do want to thank the brilliant team at the Children's Rights Alliance, in particular to Julie, to Saoirse, and to Emma, and all of the team in the Children's Rights Alliance working on this issue. I've seen firsthand their personal and professional commitment to the wide range of issues that they're working on, but I know that they are effective advocates, and it's great that so many people are joining with you and getting behind this campaign. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to everybody tuned in. Continue this debate, and let's hope we see the changes that we all wish for. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.